right, well, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. And I just am so thrilled to be here with you on day 3 of the Mobile Payments Conference. I can't thank Marla and the Mobile Payments Conference team enough for creating this 3rd day and really focusing on an area that's interesting, fun, problems galore, but gonna be a real driver for payments volume in the future. So hats off to the team here for creating this first session for us. So my job today, my name is Beth Horowitz-Steele. I'm a partner at Glenbrook Partners. My job today is to sort of do some high-level landscape, tell you what's going on in the market, and pave the way for the rest of the speakers. So first, a little bit about me. An industry veteran, or sometimes I like to say just a plain old payments geek. I've been in payments over 30 years. The last 6 have been as a consultant. And over my career, I've introduced a lot of new products, always trying to find the intersection, or the sweet spot, if you will, between what works for the providers and what works for end users. So whether it's a bank or a card issuer, a credit union, a merchant, an acquirer, how can we find something that works for everyone? In fact, I helped develop and launch the first gen contactless payment product here in the US. I'm pretty proud of where we've gotten to today. At Glenbrook, I focus on the card ecosystem. I spend a lot of time on faster payments. And I became interested in cannabis about 2 years ago when a fintech client of mine said, Beth, can you help us figure out how to legitimately serve our cannabis customers and let them take cannabis payments? And that began my journey of really digging in and understanding that this is messy and complex. And if it's messy and complex, then that's a problem that Glenbrook likes to solve. Glenbrook is a strategy consulting firm. We focus on strategy, education, and a lot of research, mostly bespoke research, if you will, for our clients. And we work across the value chain. And we think that gives us a really unique lens into the end user, how payments are consumed, why certain payment systems and tools are used for some use cases, and why not. You've got the wire system, you've got ACH, you have cards, you have cash, right? There are a lot of systems that you can choose from, and which ones do we use for different use cases. So really interesting. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, if you will, today. So first off, in our time together, what I'd like to do is provide an overview of this very complex regulatory environment, just give you a state of the state, if you will, with where we are here in the US. Really talk about the difference between cannabis and CBD. And there are really nuanced but very definitive differences between that as it relates to payments. And in fact, all of this complexity in the US market has impacts on payments, and we'll talk about that. What I'd like to do at the end is sort of provide a model for thinking about the different payment providers, and hope that will help you all think about it as well. So just to take a moment and step back from the US, this is happening across the globe. There's a fair amount of momentum, not only here in the Americas, North America, South America, but also across Europe. There's over $350 billion a year, and that's conservative estimates across legal and illegal use, if you will, in cannabis spending. Canada was legal at the country level last year. And surprisingly, I didn't know this, Uruguay was actually one of the first countries, if not the first, to legalize it at the federal level. So just an interesting fact there. Let's take a look now at the US market. This slide shows the New Frontier data, if you will. That's the source I've used. And you can see here the ramp up. And by the end of 2019, we've had about $13.6 billion. And these are conservative estimates, some would say, but here in the US. That is believed, though, to be just the beginning. There is a projected 14% growth year over year expecting it to reach 30 billion by 2025. Others say that we're going to reach 40 billion if you include hemp products as well. Now, the other thing that's really interesting to note is that there's a lot of activity with states becoming legal. We're going to talk about all of that mess in a moment. But you can see in 2017, we are beginning to really see this big ramp, if you will. Well, we had a big jump because we had California, Nevada, Minnesota, Massachusetts all becoming legal. And so you could see the ramp up, if you will. Interesting to note, in 2019, California alone accounted for 2.8 billion in legal sales. And by the way, that yielded some really nice tax benefit for the state of California. But more to come on that. And just to put this into context, I was reading a stat that said Americans spent 4.9 billion on average for beer, wine, and liquor in 2019. That was according to retail store estimates. So there's no wonder that these large beverage companies are looking to diversify using cannabis, if you will. Michigan went live in 2018, and Illinois, the state that I live in, just came live the beginning of this year in 2020, if you will. So let's talk about this dichotomy that we have between the state and the federal government. For those of you that live and breathe in the cannabis industry, you know this. Many people I speak to don't really understand the details and the nuances of this. So I want to spend a little bit of time. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a compliance expert, so I'll do it from a business perspective, and I'll leave it to my next speaker, if you will, to really dig in more on the compliance issues. But let's just frame it. At the federal level, cannabis is still classified as a Schedule I drug. That means it is a crime. You can go to jail. Many are in jail for this, financial penalties, business closures. It's on par with heroin and LSD, if you will. It's kind of crazy because cocaine and meth are only Schedule II drugs, but that's another side thing. So there's this dual regulatory framework, right? It's illegal at the federal level, which has implications for a lot of financial institutions. But then the states have started regulating it for their own states. So at a state level, so if you're a state chartered bank, if you're a credit union in a bank, in a state where it's legal, you can bank cannabis customers. The problem is you still have to adhere to BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, AML, anti-money laundering, which is regulated by the federal government. The other interesting thing to note is that any financial institution, if they accept FDIC insurance, which protects savings and monies, if you will, for the users, if the bank goes under and they all have it, then they're also subject to federal regulation, and they can lose that license if they are found out of compliance or at risk, if you will, putting funds at risk. And I love reading this because it's just amazing. The FDIC conducts regular examinations to ensure that state chartered banks, and this is a quote, comply with federal regulations, and that they are not engaging in unsafe and unsound practices, which is a bit ambiguous of what you think is unsafe and unsound. So there's a lot of what ifs and uncertainty if you're a financial institution, because you can definitely go to jail. So now let's take a look at the difference between cannabis and CBD. They don't really have the same payments issues as cannabis, as long as certain things are followed, if you will. In 2018, Mitch McConnell put through to legalize hemp in the Farm Bill, and it passed. And so first of all, CBD can be derived from both cannabis plants, and CBD can be derived from hemp plants. That makes it even more confusing. All right. So hemp-derived products from cannabis have to have less than 0.3% of the hallucinogenic THC in order for it to be sold over the counter. Because we all see these products over the counter, right? But the states, so Farm Bill at the federal level, but what the Farm Bill said is, okay, now state, you must create a plan to regulate and license the production of hemp. You have to submit a plan to the USDA and seek approval. Then you can go and grow hemp. Then the products derived from that need FDA approval. So it's a multifaceted challenge, if you will. And actually, I think it was about last month, I read that Florida was about to get approval from the USDA for their hemp program. So lots of activity there, but there are differences between that. So I'm going to show you this, whoops, sorry. I'm going to sit here and show you this map, and I'm so sorry. I see that I don't know if you can see the identification of what's going on here. So let me take you through it, and when you get a copy of this, it'll be on your deck, if you will. And I know Shiloh is going to get presentations from all of us, if you will. And by the way, send in your questions as we're going along. I'll leave time at the end for Q&A. So while there's a whole lot of legalization and illegalization happening at the same time. The other thing that happened that I want to explain is that, so the Farm Bill legalized hemp and CBD products derived from hemp. States had to create a plan to regulate and license, so not everyone's there yet. But then and many states have started to do something called decriminalize marijuana. Basically, they're saying you won't go to jail for carrying and selling. Often what happens is decriminalization is that first step for it to then being on the voter box and then getting into legislation, if you will. But let me take you through the map. Some of you may already identify some of these things, but if you look at the navy colored states, the dark blue, everything goes. Those are the states that have legalized cannabis on a medicinal and recreational level, and also have CBD programs from Maine to Alaska. Illinois was the last state in January 2020, if you will. Red refers to the states where everything is illegal. The only difference is Nebraska, which is lighter color red, has decriminalized marijuana. So we should stay tuned and watch for what's going on there. And the real nuance here is with all the green. The very dark green just says these are states that have medicinal cannabis is legal, if you will. And the others are shades of programs, CBD with the low value of THC, CBD and decriminalized, etc. So states such as Virginia, they actually became the 27th state to decriminalize marijuana, and that happened earlier this year. Arizona and Utah have legalized medicinal only. That's the darker green. Texas, in the middle there, very light green, has a CBD program. That's all they have. Minnesota and North Dakota have medicinal, and they've decriminalized it. So very complicated. I apologize. I think it will make much more sense, if you will, when you go to the PowerPoint presentation. And then just so you know, that represents, there's about 2/3 or about almost 230 million adult consumers live in a state with some form of legal cannabis. All right, so it may be messy out there, but the legalization is sort of growing and the momentum is there. At some point, it will start turning the similar colors, if you will, shades of blue. Yeah, hey Peter, thank you for that comment. Talking about the different state, the different considerations, if you will. Let me go back here because I think that's a really important point that you were mentioning. So let's go back to this dichotomy between the state and federal government and the dual regulatory framework. So, you know, the sad thing is that states can legalize cannabis, but they cannot protect their businesses operating legally in their jurisdiction from federal prosecution. FinCEN administers the AML law. FinCEN is the Financial Center for Crime Enforcement Network. They come in, and the banks that are doing this right, and I've spoken to many of them, they are working hand in glove. They've talked to FinCEN, they follow the rules of FinCEN, they understand the oversight and the complexity that is required. There's something called a SARS report that, not SARS, I'm sorry, yeah, SARS. There's a report that has to be sent to the federal government for every high risk transaction. So the intensity of the compliance and regulation on the bank side, which I know we're going to hear a lot of in a little bit from the next speaker, is incredibly difficult for financial institutions to say, should I risk the rest of my business to do all this compliance? And oh, by the way, it may take me 1 or 2 compliance people to run, you know, my $100 billion in assets, but here for 10 billion, I'm going to have 5 compliance people. So it's a very different, it's a higher level of compliance and oversight. It really is a step change in a bank because there is so much oversight for them coming back from the federal and coming from the state, because of course they can get audited by both state and federal agencies, if you will. So, you know, use that as a background and we can talk about it in more detail. Sorry about that, I'm going pretty quickly here. So now I want to talk about the impact on payments, if you will. Imagine being a financial services provider trying to figure out what laws to follow. Which comes first? You want to serve a dispensary in your state, but they also have locations out of state. If you're that dispensary or cannabis related business, you have to find a bank in each state in which you operate or revert to cash, which is what many of them do. But I want to make something else really clear. Visa and MasterCard rules are based on federal regulations. Trust me, I've worked for networks for over 20 years. The card networks follow federal regulations. Until gambling and online gambling was legal, they disallowed it on their network. So that means cannabis transactions are not allowed to flow through the major card networks. In fact, there is no MCC or merchant category code for cannabis merchants in the US. If you check and you go to the Canadian rules, you will find an MCC to categorize your transactions, and a merchant that is dealing in cannabis related businesses, or a merchant that is a cannabis related business, will get a legitimate cannabis MCC code, if you will. This is important because this is another consideration. MasterCard and Visa license their network to banks. A bank is always required at the end of the payment transaction for any transaction. They're the ones that settle the transactions. The banks are the ones that move the money. No way around it. Bank has to do something. A merchant processor, an ISO, an ISV could have a relationship with a merchant, but at the end of the day, those funds have to be settled with a legitimate bank. And that bank, who's a member or a customer of MasterCard and Visa, has a settlement obligation and a responsibility to the card networks to monitor transactions and ensure they comply with the rules and regs. Therein lies another challenge for the financial services industry. So that's why cash is king, right? There's all these rules and regs. No one knows what to do. There's been a few brave banks out there. And, you know, Partners Credit Union in Colorado created a bank, Safe Harbor Bank, Burling Bank here in Illinois. I mean, you know, those that are doing it right and doing it well, but it's not for the faint of heart. So let's talk about where cash dominates, because it dominates in all these transactions. Retail transactions, whether you're conducting it in person or via the mobile or e-com, it's happening in cash, some form or another. Business transactions, a CRB, a cannabis business, is paying their supplier. They're paying their vendors, their accountants, someone who's helping them with their books in cash. Kind of crazy. If you're a CRB, how are you paying your employees? Then what do they do with the cash? It's this increased risk of violent crime and robbery is quite substantial. In fact, there are some estimates that say dispensaries lose 6 to 8% of their revenue just by dealing with cash. Extra cost to transport it, store it, and stop it from thieves. In fact, there's been a lot of stories about dispensaries being robbed. We used to rob banks, now we rob dispensaries. So really a very difficult situation. And I know I'm speaking to a lot of people that already know this conundrum, if you will. So let's talk about the retail transaction models that are currently in market today. There are a handful of workaround situations that range from closed loop to crypto. Some are working around business regs, and some may be working on the edge. I'm not judging here, I'm rather observing that there are a variety of vehicles being used because we are so desperate to get cash out of the system and make it easy for consumers. But it does fly in the face of some of the regulations. So let me talk about a few of these. And then we'll break for some questions. So the way this chart is read, you know, there's a payment type, there's a description, the ultimate funding source, which is super important, and then just some comments I have. So if the state has legalized it and you're a cannabis business working with a bank that is in a state that's legal, they can set you up with a bank account, right? And then I, as a consumer, can go in and make a purchase with my bank account, which is legal, account to account transfer, right? I could use cash. Many prefer that, it's anonymous. It's a lower dollar transaction in many cases, but I believe the average transaction is about $58 I've seen. So it's not small potatoes. And in fact, cards are being used for that transaction level as well. But I had a couple of examples here I want to point out. So this notion of cashless ATM, this actually exists. Let's say, so you go into a store and the clerk gives you an amount of money and they say, here, go to the ATM and put in this amount. So I go, I use my debit card, I access my savings or check account, whatever that will be, put my card in the ATM, and what I get out is I get a voucher for that amount of money. I bring the voucher to the cashier, and then they give me back maybe $5 or $3.95, something like that, and I walk away. That transaction is not a cash transaction, right? There's been a voucher purchase, not a cannabis purchase, all right? I don't know. Maybe it's legit, maybe it's not. It's a little kind of kludgy, if you ask me, for a payments geek. I've seen credit cards. Many of us have seen logos, credit card, open loop cards are accepted. If you take a look at the receipt, it will often show you a name that is different of the store you bought your merchandise from. And that is not uncommon. Many valid, upright citizens of the payment processing world do this periodically. But if they get found out, it can be shut down. which is also why I've heard from CRBs nonstop that one day they could accept cards and the next day they couldn't. And that's not only because the payment processor got found out, but believe me, it's the bank that's moving the money that's the one at risk. And they've identified something that just doesn't feel right to them. Crypto hasn't had a ton of success, but I'm anxious if other people have some good examples of ones that have worked. Potcoin had some starts, and I haven't seen them on the market much, but they may be doing well. And we like it. Again, it's akin to cash, so there's an anonymity about it, but there's also a traceability of the crypto. So, you know, there's some real goodness that could happen from that. One of the things I didn't talk about is this notion of seed to sale tracking. That's so important. This is at the legislative level for knowing where the cannabis seed was grown and know where the product was. So there's this requirement to track it. And the crypto would help sort of close that mile, if you will, with the last transaction. So maybe we'll see more of that. Now there's a couple of things with prepaid, and then I'm going to pause. There's closed loop wallets that are very effective, two-sided markets, if you will. They're the wallet providers that are getting all the merchants and the consumers and the banks set up, and they're doing it all ACH. As far as I know, cash, ACH, very legitimate. Let me just tell you one situation as a decoupled transaction that's just not cool. And I did speak to the CEO of this company. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, until they stop me, I'm going to do it because this is big business. So I walk into a dispensary, huge dispensary, lots of security guards, all the merchandise is behind the counter. I get up to the counter, big computer screens on the back of it, has all the big card network brands. I said, oh, I can pay with my card. And he said, yeah. So go, handed my card. I see they swipe my card, put it down, then they swipe another card. I said, hey, what are you doing? He says, oh, just have to do this this is just the way we do it. I go back, I read my receipt. I've now bought a prepaid card for $3.95 on top of my merchandise. And then there was a top up of it for some reason. So anyway, what it showed was a prepaid card transaction that was going through the network, not cannabis purchasing. So you be the judge. I know we're resilient. We want to see a lot of things happen in the market. So I say this all to say that this is going to stay messy while the regulatory conflict remains. States are going to continue to push, and at some point, it'll just be a federal law. But until then, cash is still going to be king while we work through all of these other kinds of situations and try and figure out what could work. Because I also think more financial institutions are going to come to the market because there's banking as a service providers, and you're going to hear some about them later today. So I'm really encouraged. There's tons of opportunity here, and it's a great market. For those that have, you know, the wherewithal to have some stops and starts in it, if you will. I hope this has been helpful for you. I'm looking forward to the rest of the session this morning. This is how you can stay in touch with me. I'm going to check and see if we have some questions here, but thank you for your time. Stay safe, stay healthy. And let's see. Oh, we've got a few questions. Let's see what I can do. Hey Thad, what do you think the likelihood of the feds moving THC out of Schedule I jurisdiction next year? I think it depends on who comes into power next year. If the Democrats are in, it may not be high on Biden's list, but it's high on a lot of other, there's a bipartisan group, as you probably know, at both the House and the Senate level that are really anxious to have this passed. Their states want it. So I think it depends on who's in office. You know, Jeff Sessions was completely anti what the Obama administration and the Cole memo had sort of laid out. So it's a little bit whiplash depending on that. So I've been told that FIS and Meta is now allowing ATMs to process fully legally now at marijuana dispensaries. How is that passing federal? You know, I don't know, quite frankly. It could be that Meta is working with in the states that are legalized and doing PIN debit that way rather than not yeah, I don't really know. I do know that there's the smaller PIN debit networks are processing transactions. I've seen that myself. Yeah, Racy, thank you for that clarification. It's that next $5 increment, if you will, on that cashless ATM. So that will be the change back to the consumer. And then what advice do you have for an SMB point of sale technology provider, aka point of sale, who wants to serve the cannabis industry? I know we're out of time. This is what I say, ACH first. There's a lot of interesting ways of being able to access our ACH accounts. The fintechs are doing it all the time. We give our bank account credentials now. Faster payments is really the way forward. And consumers are willing to give their bank account information for purchases that are important to them. So there's a lot more questions I could answer, and I'd love to have this conversation. Hopefully somebody else will talk about the Safe Harbor Banking Act, and we can move forward from there. So I know I am out of time, but thank you all for your questions. And like I said, I can't wait to hear the rest of the sessions. So thank you very much.